We all remember the legendary Beatles giving us timeless hits from Love Me Do to Please Please Me. While Paul McCartney and John Lennon often carried the serious creative weight, it was Ringo Starr who brought a playful energy to the band, keeping spirits high with his humor and charm. But beneath that cheerful exterior, there was something fans never knew. For decades, people thought they had Ringo all figured out. That is, until he finally revealed a secret he'd kept hidden for years. What was it? And does it have anything to do with the Beatles? Stick around because the answer might just surprise you. Humble beginnings. Richard Starkey, who the world would later know as Ringo Starr, was born on July 7, 1940, in Liverpool, England. He was an only child, and early on, life wasn't easy. His father, Richard Starkey Sr., gradually drifted away from family life and eventually left when Ringo was just 4. After that, it was just him and his mother, Elsie, who worked tirelessly first as a cleaning woman and later as a barmaid to support the two of them. She doted on her son, doing everything she could to give him a decent life in the working-class Dingle neighborhood. But Ringo's childhood was marked by more than just hardship. It was also shaped by a series of serious health issues. At age 6, he was rushed into surgery for a burst appendix. Complications from the operation led to peritonitis, a dangerous infection, and he spent nearly a year in a children's hospital recovering. He fell far behind in school, and for a while, he had to work one-on-one with tutors just to catch up. Just as things seemed to be improving, life threw another curveball. At 13, he contracted tuberculosis, which was still a serious illness at the time. He was sent to a special sanatorium, where he spent 2 full years. It was there, among the routines and long days, that something unexpected happened. The hospital staff often tried to entertain the children to keep spirits up, and one of their activities was forming a hospital band. Since Ringo couldn't leave his bed, he was given a makeshift drum, a wooden mallet and a cabinet to bang on. That was all it took. He fell in love with rhythm. "From the minute I hit that drum," he later said, "I knew that's what I wanted to do." By the time he returned home, Ringo had missed so much school there was no real way to jump back in. Instead, he went straight into the workforce. He worked a few jobs, briefly with British Rail, then as an apprentice machinist in a local factory. It was during this time that he discovered skiffle, a homemade kind of music popular in post-war Britain. It was raw and energetic, and made with whatever you could get your hands on: a washboard, tea-chest bass, old guitars. One of his co-workers introduced him to it, and before long, Ringo was playing in a skiffle group of his own. In 1953, Ringo's mother remarried. His new stepfather, Harry Graves, turned out to be a supportive influence, especially when it came to music. In 1957, Ringo got his first real drum kit for Christmas, a life-changing gift. And that's when everything started coming together. He joined a few local groups, but things really took off when he became the drummer for Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. By then, he had adopted the stage name Ringo Starr, partly because he wore a lot of rings and partly because it sounded a bit more like the cowboy stars he admired. He had a signature drum solo that the band called Star Time, and he quickly gained a reputation as a solid, stylish drummer. During a stint in Hamburg, Germany, where British bands often played long sets for rough crowds, Ringo first crossed paths with another Liverpool group, the Beatles. At the time, they were still finding their footing, made up of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Stu Sutcliffe, and Pete Best. In October 1960, Ringo sat in with Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison on a recording session for a Hurricanes bandmate, his first time playing with the group that would soon change music history. Joining the Beatles. By August 1962, Ringo Starr officially joined the Beatles, stepping in to replace Pete Best. The change wasn't smooth. In fact, it was far from it. Best had built up a loyal following in Liverpool, particularly among female fans who saw him as mean, moody, and magnificent. Naturally, many were furious about his sudden removal. At the Beatles' first show after the switch, at the Cavern Club, a scuffle broke out. George Harrison ended up with a black eye after trying to defend Starr from angry fans. It was a rough welcome. Back in 1960, before Ringo joined, the Beatles didn't have a permanent drummer. When the band was offered a series of gigs in Hamburg, Germany, Paul McCartney took the lead in finding someone who could commit to the trip. That's when he spotted Pete Best, who was playing with his band, the Blackjacks, at the Casbah Club. Best's style, especially the way he played the bass drum steadily on all 4 beats, stood out. It gave the music a driving rhythm, and that impressed McCartney. Best agreed to go to Hamburg after McCartney told him they'd each be making £15 a week. Quite a sum for young musicians in those days. At the time, Best had the option of going to teacher training college, having passed his school exams, unlike Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison, but the lure of performing overseas won out. He auditioned at the Jacaranda Club and left for Germany the next day. The club's owner, Alan Williams, later admitted that the audition was more for show, as there weren't many drummers lining up for a trip like that. But he kept quiet, so Best wouldn't ask for more money. Fast forward 2 years, and the band's growing success brought new pressure. When producer George Martin and his engineers heard Best during a test session, they weren't impressed. Martin wanted to bring in a session drummer for the official recordings. Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison took this seriously. They didn't just want someone who looked cool on stage. They wanted someone who could help shape their sound in the studio. They turned to their manager, Brian Epstein, to handle the difficult conversation. Epstein agonized over the decision. In his memoir, A Cellar Full of Noise, he wrote that he wasn't convinced by Martin's opinion and didn't want to shake up the group just as they were beginning to develop a strong identity. Still, he consulted others, like local DJ Bob Wooler, who warned him it might be a mistake after all. Best was a crowd favorite. He brought people to the shows and gave the band a certain mystique. But ultimately, the group prioritized the music. They believed Ringo, who had already sat in with them a few times when Best was unavailable, was the better fit. Epstein withheld one major piece of information from Best. The band had already been offered a recording contract with EMI, orally in June, and officially signed at the end of July 1962. Telling him could have opened the door to legal complications. Instead, Epstein decided, if the group was to remain happy, Pete Best must go. Best played his final gigs with the Beatles on August 15th at the Cavern Club. The next day, Epstein called him into his office and told him it was over. He asked Best to perform 2 more shows on the 16th and 17th at the River Park Ballroom in Chester. And Best initially agreed, but then changed his mind and didn't show up. Johnny Hutchinson of the Big Three stepped in as a last-minute replacement. Epstein had reportedly first offered Hutchinson the full-time drummer slot, but Hutch declined, saying, "Pete Best is a very good friend of mine. I couldn't do the dirty on him." Despite the backlash, McCartney and Harrison later said that Starr had always been their first choice. Best himself claimed that Epstein told him, during the meeting where he was let go, that Ringo would be his replacement. Even after officially joining the Beatles, Ringo Starr's position wasn't exactly rock solid. At his first recording session with producer George Martin, Starr was benched in favor of a session drummer. Instead of manning the drum kit, Ringo was handed a tambourine and maracas. He feared the worst, that he'd be let go before he even had a chance to prove himself. But things quickly began to shift. Fans who had been skeptical at first started to warm up to him. His easy charm, quick wit, and unique drumming style gradually won over the public and the band alike. Before long, Ringo wasn't just the Beatles' drummer, he was one of the Fab Four. The Beatles' single Please Please Me launched them into pop superstardom in England, and the debut album of the same name, released in March 1963, only added to the growing frenzy that would soon explode into full-blown Beatlemania. On that album, Starr took lead vocals on the song Boys, a rare spotlight moment for the drummer early on. In 1964, with their signature mop-top haircuts and matching suits, the Beatles crossed the Atlantic to kick off what would become a full-scale British invasion of American pop culture. Beatlemania hit fever pitch during their U.S. television debut on The Ed Sullivan Show. Their single, I Want to Hold Your Hand, had already shot to the top of the Billboard Hot 100 chart by the time they appeared, securing their first American #1. One hit, and many more would follow. Practically overnight, the Beatles became global icons, dominating the youth culture of the decade. Their concerts were filled with screaming fans, many of them teens hopelessly smitten with the boys from Liverpool. Ringo didn't just keep the beat, he contributed creatively too. Over the years, he wrote and sang a handful of songs that have become beloved parts of the Beatles' discography. Take Don't Pass Me By from the White Album, for instance. It was the first Beatles song written entirely by Ringo, and it blends a bit of dark humor with country influences. The lyrics tell the story of a man waiting anxiously for his partner, only to discover she was in a car crash, losing her hair, no less. It's quirky and unexpected, with a lumbering bass line, whimsical violin, and a playful, off-kilter charm. Ringo's drumming isn't prominent in the mix, but the overall feel of the song fits his unique musical voice perfectly. Then there's Octopus's Garden from Abbey Road. It's pure joy in musical form. Ringo invites listeners into a magical underwater world free from worry. The warm harmonies, sunny guitar licks, and playful sound effects like bubbles and underwater-sounding vocals help bring that fantasy to life. George Harrison's guitar work shines, and John and George's backing vocals sound like they're having the time of their lives. It's one of those Beatles songs that radiates happiness, and it's hard not to smile when you hear it. And of course, with a little help from my friends, from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, might be Ringo's most iconic vocal moment. The song leans into everything that makes a great Ringo track. A catchy but comfortable melody, friendly lyrics, and a fun call and response structure with the other Beatles. Paul's bass line bounces along with a classic tone, and the whole thing feels like a celebration of friendship. Ringo's steady drumming anchors the track, and the overall vibe is nothing short of joyful. It's no wonder this one stands out, not just as a Ringo song, but as a Beatles classic. In June of that same year, Starr faced a setback when he was sidelined again, this time by illness. Struck with pharyngitis and tonsillitis, he had to step away from the tour, and drummer Jimmy Nicol filled in. When Ringo rejoined the band a few weeks later, he was relieved to find that his spot was still his. His return was just in time for the Beatles' next major milestone, the big screen. A Hard Day's Night, a witty, fast-paced film that captured the chaos and charm of Beatlemania, hit theaters and was an instant hit. The soundtrack album shot to #1. Won on the Billboard 200 and stayed there for 14 weeks. The title track earned a Grammy Award for Best Performance by a Vocal Group, and the band also took home the award for Best New Artist of 1964. Their second film, Help, released the following year, was another box office and chart-topping success. On that soundtrack, Ringo got another turn at lead vocals with Act Naturally, a country-style tune that fit his voice and sense of humor to a T. Both movies showed off more than just his drumming. They highlighted his comedic timing and natural screen presence. In 1965, Ringo and the rest of the Beatles were honored by Queen Elizabeth II with the Member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, MBE medals, an extraordinary recognition of their cultural impact. That same year, the Beatles had a chance to meet one of their biggest musical heroes, Bob Dylan. As the story goes, it was Ringo who first tried marijuana with Dylan, while the others hesitated. Of course, that wouldn't last. Times were changing, and so were the Beatles. The breakup. While John Lennon and Paul McCartney earned most of the praise for their groundbreaking songwriting, Ringo Starr's contributions often flew under the radar. Sure, he was the drummer, but he was also the heartbeat of the band in more ways than one. Ringo wasn't just the guy keeping time. He brought warmth, humor, and emotional balance to a group known for its internal tensions and larger-than-life personalities. His steady presence helped keep the Beatles grounded, and his creative input, even if less publicized, was quietly essential. Unlike many drummers who stayed tucked in the shadows, Starr stood proudly as an equal member of the Fab Four. Though he didn't churn out hits like Lennon or McCartney, he was featured on at least one track on every album and was perfectly content with that. He didn't need the spotlight to shine. His drumming style, distinctive and deceptively simple, gave the Beatles their rhythmic soul and went on to influence generations of drummers. In 1966, after years of relentless touring and the madness of Beatlemania, the band played their final concert at San Francisco's Candlestick Park. It marked the end of an era. From that point on, the Beatles focused entirely on recording, and their music evolved rapidly. In 1967, they released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, one of rock's first true concept albums. Designed to be experienced from start to finish, it spent a record 15 weeks atop the Billboard 200 and won 2 Grammys, including Album of the Year. The Beatles continued to push creative boundaries, and in 1968, they released The Beatles, better known as the White Album. It was a sprawling, eclectic mix of sounds and ideas, with Ringo contributing the offbeat country tune Don't Pass Me By. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling. Tensions ran high at Abbey Road Studios. Each member began feeling increasingly isolated, and Ringo, in particular, felt like an outsider. He noticed he was being left out of more and more sessions, like when Paul recorded Why Don't We Do It in the Road without involving anyone else. Feeling unappreciated, Ringo walked out, quietly becoming the first Beatle to quit. But his absence didn't go unnoticed. The others quickly realized just how much Ringo meant to the group. They sent him telegrams telling him he was the best drummer in the world. When he finally returned, he found his drum kit waiting for him covered in flowers, with a note that read, "Welcome back, Ringo." The gesture said it all. The Beatles were a band again, at least for the moment. Despite the reunion, tensions never fully dissolved. Ringo began exploring other creative outlets. In 1969, he starred alongside Peter Sellers in the satirical film The Magic Christian. That same year, the Beatles gave what would be their final public performance, an unannounced rooftop concert atop their Apple Corps building in London. It was a spontaneous, iconic moment captured on film for what would become their swan song movie, Let It Be. Then, in April 1970, it became official. Paul McCartney announced he was leaving the band, marking the formal breakup of the Beatles. Fans held on to hope, thinking they'd get back together after all. This wasn't the first time the group had fractured. In fact, they'd disbanded behind the scenes more than once before, but this time, it was final. Since the breakup, fans and music historians alike have speculated endlessly about what really tore the band apart. Some blame the death of their manager, Brian Epstein, whose steady hand had guided them through their early rise. Others point to John Lennon's relationship with Yoko Ono, whose constant presence at recording sessions disrupted the group's dynamic. Theories abound, but the truth may always remain a bit mysterious. The band members themselves insisted that it came down to creative differences, and after 8 intense years together, they had simply grown apart. It was the end of a remarkable era in music history. Over the course of a single decade, the Beatles amassed 20 #1 hits, and more than 45 top 40 singles in the US alone. But their legacy goes far beyond chart numbers. They reinvented what pop music could be. pushing boundaries, experimenting fearlessly, and forever altering the soundscape of modern music. And through it all, Ringo Starr was right there, steady behind the drum kit, always ready with a joke, a smile, or the perfect fill. He wasn't just the drummer, he was the glue, the soul, and sometimes the laughter that held the most iconic band in history together for as long as it could last. Solo career. Just before the Beatles officially parted ways, Ringo Starr took his first steps as a solo artist. In March 1970, he released his debut album, Sentimental Journey, a nostalgic collection of Tin Pan Alley standards. The album featured arrangements by musical heavyweights like Quincy Jones, Maurice Gibb, George Martin, and even Paul McCartney. Just 5 months later, Starr showed his versatility with Beaucoup of Blues, recorded in Nashville and leaning heavily into country and western influences, a notable shift from the rock-pop style fans had come to expect. His third solo effort, Ringo, released in November 1973, became his most successful and best-selling album. It debuted at number 1, 2 on the Billboard 200, and delivered 2 number 1s. 1 hits in the US, Photograph and You're 16, along with the top 5 single, Oh My My. Starr's charm and reputation as a dependable collaborator drew top-tier talent to the project, including contributions from each of his former Beatles bandmates. The follow-up album, Goodnight Vienna, 1974, continued this success, peaking at number 1, 8 on the Billboard chart and producing hits like No No Song, Snookeroo, and Only You. In 1975, Starr launched his own record label, Ring-O Records. But by his own admission, his heavy drinking and drug use during this time kept him from achieving much with it. He and The Who's Keith Moon, famed for his wild lifestyle, were both part of the notorious Hollywood Vampires Drinking Club, a reflection of Starr's off-stage turbulence. That September, he released Ringo's Rotogravure, which featured songs written by all 3 of his former Beatles bandmates. Although it yielded a few minor hits, it marked the beginning of a period where commercial success proved elusive. Albums like Stop and Smell the Roses, 1981, with contributions from McCartney, Harrison, Ronnie Wood, Harry Nilsson, and Stephen Stills, failed to make a major impact. Originally, the album was also supposed to include 2 songs from John Lennon, but after Lennon's death in 1980, Starr decided it no longer felt right to record them. In the late 1980s, Starr reinvented himself once again, this time as a band leader. He formed the first incarnation of his all-star band, a rotating supergroup featuring artists like Joe Walsh, the Eagles, Niels Lofgren, Clarence Clemens, E Street Band, Rick Danko and Levon Helm, the band, Billy Preston, and Dr. John. The all-star band would go on to become a beloved, ever-evolving touring project, with numerous tours and live albums showcasing Starr's collaborative spirit. In 1992, Starr received critical praise for Time Takes Time, one of his most well-regarded solo records. Then, in 1994, he reunited with McCartney and Harrison for a historic project, completing unfinished John Lennon demos. The result was Free as a Bird, the first new Beatles song since 1970. Released in 1995 as part of the Beatles Anthology Project, a mini-series and companion album set, the single became a top 10 hit and won 3 Grammy Awards. A second Lennon demo, Real Love, was similarly reworked and met with success in 1996. Starr continued exploring and sharing his musical journey through the years, including a memorable appearance on VH1 Storytellers in 1998. The performance was later released as an album, offering fans a candid look at the man behind the drum kit. In the decades that followed, Starr released a steady stream of albums, including Liverpool 8, 2008, Why Not, 2010, Ringo 2012, and Postcards from Paradise, 2015. In April 2018, he signed a major worldwide publishing deal with BMG, granting them rights to his Beatles-era compositions like Octopus's Garden, and solo hits like Photograph and You're 16. Starr's most recent release, Look Up, January 2024, returns to his country roots. Recorded in both Nashville and Los Angeles, the album features 11 new songs and includes collaborations with Alison Krauss and Larkin Poe. With its heartfelt lyrics and down-home feel, Look Up shows that Ringo Starr is still evolving, still creating, still collaborating, and still keeping time to the beat of his own drum. Ringo Starr's turbulent marriage. Ringo Starr met Maureen Cox when she was just a teenager and a regular at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, where the Beatles famously got their start. At just 15, Maureen braved long queues and fierce competition for a chance to see the band, earning a kiss from Ringo, though he didn't immediately single her out among his many admirers. She called him Richie, short for Richard, and despite the Beatles' image of being unattached, the two began quietly dating in 1962. Maureen's relationship with Starr wasn't easy. As the girlfriend of a Beatle, she was targeted by jealous fans and was once even scratched in the face by a rival. The threats became so intense that she had to give up her job as a hairdresser. In September 1963, with her parents' permission, she joined Ringo, Paul McCartney, and Jane Asher on a trip to Greece. On the eve of an international Beatles tour, Starr collapsed during a photo session in London with a high fever and tonsillitis. Maureen visited him in the hospital every day, and after his recovery, the two became a monogamous couple. On January 20, 1965, Ringo proposed to Maureen at the Ad Lib Club in London. Just a few weeks later, after discovering she was pregnant, 18-year-old Maureen married Ringo on February 11, 1965, at Caxton Hall in London. The wedding was arranged hastily by Beatles manager Brian Epstein, in hopes of keeping it private. John Lennon attended, jokingly warning Maureen not to cry, or she wouldn't be one of the gang. George Harrison arrived by bicycle and quipped, "2 down, 2 to go," referring to the remaining unmarried Beatles. McCartney was in Tunisia at the time and couldn't attend. The newlyweds had a short honeymoon at the holiday home of Epstein's lawyer in Hove. But even on their wedding day, they couldn't avoid the spotlight. Over 100 reporters and photographers surrounded the home, prompting a brief garden interview. Shortly after, Ringo had to leave for the Bahamas to begin filming Help. Maureen avoided the media, declining interviews to stay out of the publicity whirlwind. A Beatles spokesperson noted that both she and Ringo preferred it that way. The couple lived at 34 Montague Square in London, before moving in July 1965 to a 6-bedroom home called Sunny Heights in St. George's Hill, Weybridge. The home was filled with quirks: a private pub called the Flying Cow, a jukebox, a pool table, a portrait of Lennon and McCartney, TVs in nearly every room, and even a go-kart track outside. Though Maureen cooked, the household had a live-in nanny and a daily cleaning woman. Later, they moved to a 16th-century mansion in Elstead, which they bought from actor Peter Sellers, but quickly sold to Stephen Stills. In April 1969, they settled into a new home at Round Hill on Compton Avenue in Highgate, London, and in 1973 purchased John Lennon's former estate at Tittenhurst Park. Maureen became close friends with Cynthia Lennon and Patty Harrison. The Beatles' wives often shopped together, celebrated holidays, and supported each other through the chaos of Beatlemania. Ringo once promised to help Maureen launch a nationwide hairdressing business, but the plan was ultimately abandoned as she focused on raising their children and managing life as the wife of a Beatle. That role wasn't always glamorous. She often waited late into the night with a home-cooked meal for Ringo after his long recording sessions. She answered piles of fan club letters by hand and supported her husband through thick and thin. The couple even dabbled in the arts together, collaborating on photo montages, paintings, and sculptures. offering a rare glimpse of quiet creativity behind their very public lives. On 19 February 1968, Ringo and Maureen Starr traveled to Rishikesh, India, alongside Paul McCartney and Jane Asher to join John and Cynthia Lennon and George and Patty Harrison, who had arrived 3 days earlier. The group had come to study transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. While the Beatles embraced the spiritual retreat, Maureen struggled with the environment. She took an instant dislike to the persistent spiders, mosquitoes, and flies around the ashram. At night, the men often gathered outside to write music, while the women typically convened in one of their rooms, discussing life as the partner of a Beatle. The Starrs left India earlier than the others, departing on the 1st of March. They cited the unfamiliar food and their longing to see their children as the reasons for cutting the trip short. Despite her discomfort in India, Maureen remained connected to the Beatles' inner circle. She sang backup vocals on The Continuing Story of Bungalow Bill from the White Album, and she was present at the Beatles' final live performance, the legendary rooftop concert at Applecore in 1969. Sitting beside Yoko Ono near a chimney stack to keep warm, Maureen can be seen in the footage later released in Let It Be. As the performance concluded, Paul McCartney cheekily said, "Thanks, Mo," after their final rendition of Get Back. But as the Beatles began to unravel in 1970, so did the Starrs' marriage. Ringo's drinking and infidelity became more frequent, placing increasing strain on their relationship. A shocking betrayal came during a visit from George and Patty Harrison. George confessed his feelings for Maureen, which led to an affair. When Patty discovered the two in bed together, she told Ringo. John Lennon was furious with Harrison, calling the incident virtual incest. Despite the betrayal, Maureen didn't initially want a divorce. She tried to hold the marriage together, even amid mounting tension and heartbreak. But after Ringo began a relationship with American fashion model Nancy Lee Andrews, the end became inevitable. Their divorce was finalized on 17 July 1975, with Maureen receiving custody of their children, a one-off settlement of £125,000, annual payments of £23,000, plus an additional £2,500 a year for each child. The end of the marriage took a heavy toll on Maureen. She struggled emotionally and at one point attempted to take her own life by riding a motorbike into a brick wall. Years later, Ringo would reflect on the dysfunction in their relationship, admitting, "I was a drunk, a wife-beater, and an absent father." In 1987, Maureen brought a lawsuit against the law firm Withers LPP, which had handled her divorce. She claimed the firm, and specifically partner Charles Doty, had failed to properly investigate Ringo's finances and had not adequately represented her interests in the settlement. She was present every day during the 3-week trial, and in testimony referred to herself as thick as 2 short planks, while comparing Ringo to the cartoon character Andy Capp, a notorious drunk and womanizer. The judge ultimately ruled in favor of Doughty and Withers, citing Starr's ongoing generosity, noting he had voluntarily increased her payments twice since the divorce. Maureen was ordered to pay the full legal costs of the trial, an amount exceeding £200,000. Ringo's second marriage. In April 1980, Ringo Starr found love again, this time with actress and former Bond girl Barbara Bach. The pair met while filming the movie Caveman, a commercial flop but a personal turning point for both. At the time, Starr was years past the Beatles' peak and still struggling with dependency issues. But something clicked between them, and the spark endured. They married in a quiet civil ceremony on April 27, 1981, at the Marylebone Register Office in London. Unlike the lavish celebrity weddings of the era, theirs was low-key and intimate. "I love the man," Bach once told people, and that's it. Simple as it sounds, it's a love that has lasted. The journey hasn't always been easy. Early on, the couple faced challenges rooted in addiction. But together, they entered rehab in 1988 and have remained sober ever since. Now, after more than 4 decades of marriage, Ringo and Barbara continue to be each other's strongest support. As a blended family, they've raised 5 children. Ringo's 3 children, with his late ex-wife Maureen Zach, Jason and Lee, and Barbara's 2 children, Francesca and Gianni. Through ups and downs, their relationship remains strong. So, what do you think about Ringo Starr? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a beat.